Laura Ladson-Billings gives a very good coverage of critical race theory. She wrote the piece in the 90s, and she's a leading figure in that idea of critical race theory, which of course derives partly from legal studies, but adds certain things as well, and it puts the emphasis on the pervasiveness of the issue of race and how it's structurally embedded in societies, not just something that comes up at particular points of difficulty, but is there anyway, it's there in our language. She also says that liberalism itself is structurally racist as well. So it's a very, very broad challenge. If you don't mind, I'm not going to talk directly about that paper. Instead, I'm going to give you some visual examples to work with. And I said just now that many of you know I'm interested in Stanley Cavell, and many of you have studied Stanley Cavell to some extent. Stanley Cavell's 89 now, and he's spent most of his working life in Harvard as a philosopher. He's written a lot about film and literature, as well as about more conventional philosophical topics. And what I'm going to do now is just talk very briefly about an item in his autobiography, which is called Little Did I Know. And then I'm going to talk about two pieces that he wrote about a film. So in Little Did I Know, his autobiography, which came out about 5 years ago, he described something that happened when he was 7, and he was good at playing the piano. His mother was a concert pianist. He was very good at playing the piano. And this is in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was in a kind of concert in a big hall. And in this concert, he was to play a piano piece called Indian Drums. And Indian drums would refer to so-called Red Indians, as we would have said back then, Indians in America. And so he was all prepared to play this piece. He was very excited because he was to be dressed up as an Indian with a headdress with feathers and so on. And he was ready to play. His mother took him into the place where he put on his costume, and there was a men's changing room and a ladies', and she couldn't go in the men's. So he's only 7. She took him into the ladies'. And there was a girl he'd seen who was going to perform in the same show. She was going to be some Indian princess or something. And she was probably about 8 or 9, and he thought she was wonderful. He'd never seen quite such a beautiful girl as this before. And he went into the ladies' changing room. His mother gave him his headdress and so on, and she went out for something. And then this girl came in, and she took all her clothes off. And he was absolutely shocked. You know, he was amazed by what he was seeing. But she took her clothes off in order to get dressed, and then she started covering herself in brown paint or makeup to play the part of the Indian princess. So it was an extraordinary experience for him. He went and played his piece, but as he came out, he had to go up the stairs, and it said, "Coloured entrance only." So this is Atlanta in 1931, coloured entrance only, and he has a very clear memory of seeing that written there, him dressed up as an Indian, and then this sign being up there, which divided people. It made a very big impact on him, and it surfaces in his writing later on. But he never comes out with straightforward or easy positions. He never just follows a crowd in these things. And one of the ways this is illustrated is in a piece that he wrote in relation to a Fred Astaire film. Now, Fred Astaire, if you don't know, was perhaps the most famous and successful Hollywood song and dance man. Song and dance is this style of dance, tap dance, holding a cane, a black and white stick, and wearing a top hat, white shirt, bow tie, a coat with tails. I think you know the style. And he was a brilliant dancer. This style of dancing derives from black dancing, dances that the slaves used to do back 100, 200 years before. Those black traditions of music and dance that actually feed into and create the most striking aspects of American popular culture. And Cavell has always been interested both in kind of highbrow classical culture and in popular culture as well. So we're going to look at this film for about 10 minutes altogether. The first few minutes are an introductory episode, an introductory scene, when we're introduced to a character called Tony Hunter, who's actually a little bit like Fred Astaire. Tony Hunter has been a very successful song and dance man, but he's come nearer to the end of his career. He's not as famous as he was. It's a fading star, and he's short of money. So some of his own possessions are now being auctioned, including the top hat and gloves, white gloves, and stick. And we're actually in an auction room now. In a minute, the camera will pan round to an auction for these items. So I'm going to play 5 minutes and ask you to watch carefully. Try to look at the way black and white comes into the screen in various senses. Already we've got it on the screen now, black and white. And try to think about what you see in this sequence. What I should say also is that the auction room's in Los Angeles, but Tony Hunter's making his way to New York, where he's been invited to take part in a play. And the play is a reworking of the Faust legend. And he's on his way nervously to try to make this comeback in his career. Bear in mind, of course, this is a Hollywood film from 1953. You have to make allowances for that in various ways. Let me pause for a minute there. The colours you've seen have predominantly been those brown costumes, brown clothes the men are wearing, and his grey suit, which is rather a pasty grey. And of course there's the black servant waiting on the car as well. What you may also have noticed is that this is a song and dance man, and you have not seen his feet. And carry on watching for this. In the scene we're looking at, you don't see his feet at all, the thing that is the vital part for the man. Okay, that is the real Ava Gardner, who was probably the most famous female star of that particular time. And probably you noticed that she's wearing black and white pearls. The contrasts of her skin and her clothing are very clear, beautiful dark hair and so on. So she looks very different from the way he looked. He comes out, he thought the reception party might be for him, but of course it's not. And then he's stuck leaning on that luggage, and it's only when the black man pulls the luggage away that he's prompted to move, that he then walks down the platform. And he sings this very boring song, "I'll Make My Way by Myself," rather mournful song. Okay, I'm going to move fairly quickly. Does anybody want to ask anything or comment at all before I carry on? Okay, part of this is about the reputation and praise, celebrity and praise. What is real praise and what is false praise? The auction room is already about kind of phony values, whether you want somebody's toothbrush or not, because it belonged to a star. It's partly about false kinds of values. The red carpet relates to values. The press party waiting to photo the real Ava Gardner. You know, Coetzee mixes real people, like Thomas Nagel, and fictional characters. Elizabeth Costello, in the full novel, is said to have had an affair with a real poet. I mean, the poet is someone who's named, like Ted Hughes is named. So the muddling of reality and fiction, or of the God's world and the real world sometimes, that comes up in that novel. Right, just after this, he walks out onto the street, and suddenly there's a reception party. There's a party of people saying, "Tony Hunter, Tony Hunter." And they're carrying big signs, and it says, "Tony Hunter Fan Club." And he thinks, oh, I'm welcome after all. They're excited about me. But then he realizes it's two of his friends who are having a joke. Right? They've pretended they're the fan club. There are only two of them, not much of a fan club. And immediately after that, almost immediately after that, we move on to another scene when he's by himself. Okay, so I'm going to show you some more slides in a minute, then we'll go back to it a little later, but anybody like to comment on that? It's the opening 10 minutes from this film called The Bandwagon from 1953. Vincent Minnelli film, popular director, father of Liza Minnelli, who you may know as a singer, Judy Garland's daughter. Right, let me go back then and show you some slides in relation to this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Stanley Cavell, as I said. Partly what I'm interested by relates to what Stefan Ramakers and Joris Vlieger wrote, but I won't dwell on that. Cavell wrote two pieces which he gave in quite prominent circumstances. The first one, Something Out of the Ordinary, which means both something strange and something that comes from the ordinary, something that is about the ordinary. And that one relates to the first of the sequences I showed you, the one when there's the walk along the platform. And he gave that as the presidential address to the American Philosophy Association, So quite a big meeting, high-profile meeting. When Coetzee gave the Tanner lectures, they didn't expect him to tell a story, the story of Elizabeth Costello. And when she gave the lectures she was giving, they weren't expecting the topic that she came up with. So it was quite an unusual thing for him to talk about a film in this circumstance, a philosophy meeting, and particularly unusual to talk about a clip from an apparently trivial Hollywood song and dance film from 1953. The second title, Fred Astaire Asserts the Right to Praise, relates to the second clip, the dance routine we've just looked at. And there, the thing that Cavell is concerned with is whether you can see this as Fred Astaire paying tribute to the black traditions that his own art comes from. So Fred Astaire is an enormously successful star. What he does, song and dance, is basically a black tradition. And he learnt much of what he does from a great black performer called Bojangles. Now, one way to view the film is just the way that the audience at the time would have done, most likely. Most of the audience at the time would have thought, oh, this is quite fun, entertaining, unusual story. It's a story which is about the production of a play, so it's a play within a play, in a sense. Quite entertaining, good stars, good song and dancing. That's the way most of the audience, I guess, would have seen it at the time. Another way is expressed by Michael Rogin, who in his book Blackface, White Noise talks about the systematic exploitation of black images of black people and of black stereotypes within Hollywood cinema. Okay, that's a very recurrent feature as cinema develops through the 20s and 30s. The first film with sound is a film called The Jazz Singer in 1927, and that has a white Jewish man in blackface, that means black makeup, playing the part of a black singer. So Michael Rogin is very critical. The bandwagon reinforces structural forms of oppression and injustice, and that all this, and he also says, all this goes unnoticed because of the enjoyment the audience experiences. So it reinforces those forms of injustice. Cavell's response to this is that the sustained message of Rogin's book is that such Hollywood films are engaged in the establishment of America's national identity and culture through the appropriation, the taking of black culture, constituting racialized entertainment as a commodity. A process which, as part of incorporating newcomers to these shores, to America, has from beginning to end been accomplished at the price of excluding Afro-Americans from full equality, or let's say from constitution. And the word constitution is very significant because when the American Constitution is established, with the Declaration of Independence, we the people, and so on, then it's a constitution which gives equality to people, but not to black people and not to women. Right? So it's and that continues to be the case for more than a century after that. So the question of constitution here, who can be part of this culture that is America, is absolutely to the point. So this is Cavell's repetition of the message of Rogin's book. And he writes also, the perception of exclusion, that black people have somehow been excluded from society, must not be denied, nor must it be blunted. We mustn't say anything to reduce the sense of that exclusion or the reality of that exclusion, the truth of it. But then he criticizes Rogin. He says Rogin's violence of attitude, understandable as it may be, and he explains, a perception of systematic, blatant, and prolonged injustice may well brush you with madness, with craziness, with monomania, obsession with a particular thing. But this perception of injustice does not allow Rogin to recognize that Astaire's dance of praise is itself to be understood specifically as about this painful and potentially deadly irony of the white praise of a black culture whose very terms of praise it's appropriated. So when Astaire expresses himself, he expresses himself by black means, by black song and dance. Can he praise the traditions he's benefited from, even though he's massively wealthy and those other black people aren't? It's an interesting point that the black shoeshine man was a real shoeshine man who was recruited for this film. And at the end of the film, he went back to being a shoeshine man. Quite incredible, I think. Okay? So there's something about being brushed with madness in contemplating this inheritance. And I'll give you a local version of that. I expect you like it round here, don't you? There's some beautiful buildings in the square just behind us. Did you notice them? Beautiful old buildings. Those buildings are Georgian. They come from the beginning of the 19th century. Britain was very wealthy at the beginning of the 19th century, partly because of the slave trade. Okay, so, and the wealth that is here in this country now, that gives us pretty good standard of living and good universities and so on, partly that derives from the British Empire and indeed from the slave trade. So in a sense, we're benefiting from that. The point is, it's enough to brush you with madness, touch you with madness. That's the point, okay? So on Cavell's view, this has something to teach us about dance, which can be a kind of expression of madness, but also about praise itself, and perhaps about their relation to a kind of madness. The madness that might be induced by the complexities of these problems, just as Elizabeth becomes mad, or something like mad, through the complexities of the things she's talking about. The complexities of the problems of inheritance and injustice. Because as we said yesterday, in any society, when you go back, you come to violence and bloodshed. Inevitably, you come to injustice. There's no way of undoing that, of resolving it, whatever reparations one attempts to make. So, anybody want to comment, or shall I just carry on? I'm not going to talk for hours, but Alison tells me I don't talk too much. So.
Joking.
Oh, yes. Right, this is Robert Gooding Williams, who's a Chicago, I think he's in Chicago now, professor of philosophy. And he's taken up Cavell's writings about this. Rogin's passing criticism of the film is to be contrasted with the more qualified and more uneasy, though still forthright criticism that Cavell's reading has provoked from Robert Gooding Williams. An indication of the attentiveness, the carefulness of this approach, which will also, well, never mind the next bit, is found in this paraphrasing of Cavell's central question. So he paraphrases the question as follows: how can white praise of a black culture whose terms of praise it's appropriated defeat or avoid its perhaps inevitable tendency to a sort of theatricality, a theatricality that's pitched to white fantasies and ideologies about blacks? So if we see Astaire as praising the black culture, then doesn't this recycle or reinstall a certain conceptualization of the black man? The black man as full of energy, full of a natural life, like the 18th century idea of the noble savage. Does it reinstall that? White fantasies about the black man. So Cavell writes that our failures of acknowledgement in everyday life typically involve a theatricalization of our lives. We isolate ourselves, keep silent and hide in the dark, and thus convert the other into a character, making the world a stage for him. And it's a live question for Cavell whether or how, in an unjust society, Astaire can acknowledge and praise the black origins of his tradition. Do you see the problem? You can't just undo the society you're in, just as we can't undo what's immediately around us here. We can't sort of just get rid of those beautiful 18th century buildings or the wealth on which UCL was founded. So the film's laid the way for this by presenting us with scenes where praise might be thought idolatrous, worshipping a false god, in other words, not a real star, or empty, which Cavell now differentiates from the burlesque, the showiness of those that appear in the arcade scene. The arcade is the place with the amusements where we've just been. And in contestation with all of which, he wants to evaluate Astaire's assertion of the right to praise. So let's see where this goes. A central question: can there be praise from the white man for something that originated in slavery? Or is slavery so appalling that to start talking about song and dance is just failing to get the point? Can there be praise from agents or beneficiaries of that appalling condition? Can there be praise where the appropriation and inheritance of that tradition has in certain circumstances extended economic exploitation? So Minnelli's film does well out of this praise of black people. And there's a footnote in Gooding-Williams' discussion suggests a further possibility, and this is pursued by Harvey Cormier. Sorry, there's Harvey Cormier. And he says that the arcade is a queer space and a subversive sexual thread is there from the start. Astaire stands idly at a footstall. I'll show you the pictures in a minute. Stands idly there, the seller hands him a wiener. Now, in my British naivety, I didn't know what that meant, but American friends tell me a wiener, which actually means a sausage from Vienna, from Wien. A wiener is a sausage, but it's also slang for a penis. So Astaire does not know what to do with it when he's given this. He doesn't ask for the sausage, he's just given it. And shortly he passes it on to a young boy, which is creepy in itself. And then Astaire is feminized in the shoe shine itself. There's something very strange going on when he's sitting up on that high chair and sticking one leg out after another. It's almost as though he's having his nails varnished at some time, isn't it? Polished. And perhaps in the dance itself that follows, which is, in any case, a dance of one man with another man. And Astaire comes back to the mysterious closed box in the middle of the room, which he's looked at to start with and couldn't open. You can't find the combination to open it. And he's tried twiddling the handles to find the right key combination. But finally, the second time he goes round, he moves about, cavorts in front of it, finally hitting it firmly with his backside. And Vincent Minnelli, the director, was homosexual, and of course it was illegal in any case at that time, and he was uneasy, understandably, with his condition, and he was uneasy with conventionally ascribed gender roles. Of course, uneasy with legislation too. So if you go through the reading that Harvey Cormier has just given us, that disturbs what we've been thinking about so far. So we've got a series of disturbances of readings. We've got the ordinary Hollywood audience reading, then we've got the reaction that this is just racism once again, then we've got something that complicates it, that perhaps it's some sort of acknowledgement of the traditions that the dance tradition comes from, and perhaps a moment when the two can dance together in a kind of equality. Then we get the complication from Gooding-Williams, and now the one from Cormier. All of it makes more complex this scene you've seen. So let me remind you some of the key moments then in that scene. So he's just come in, Astaire, or Hunter, Tony Hunter has just come in, and he says to the seller, "Didn't this used to be some particular theatre? I think I remember this place. It's all changed now. This is Broadway, and it's all changed." And without asking for a hot dog, for a wiener, he gets given one. The man just puts one in his open hand. And there you see him walking round the arcade, and we've got those grotesque things that you would have found in this sort of space at that time, including the gorilla attacking the white woman. That would be a regular feature. It's what comes in some Hollywood films. King Kong has that same sort of theme to it in some ways, doesn't it? And then on the right-hand side, you see this rather tall woman, a rather surprisingly tall woman of slightly masculine build, who comes back into the scene several times, as well as this boy. This woman has just pushed Astaire out of the way because she wants to look at that scene. And then he doesn't know what to do with his hot dog. He's sort of holding it awkwardly, his wiener, and then he's about to put it in the trash can, but gives it to the boy instead, who's been looking at it. After that, he steps onto that machine, which says, "Electricity is life." And when he steps onto it, it's as though he's got a shock and immediately jumps off. He can't cope with that energy. He's frightened of it. And he wanders around the scene. There's the scene with the question mark. The woman's trying to open it and she cannot, neither can he. Look at the difference in height there too. There he is looking for praise, looking for some sort of praise of himself, and he gets the response, he's gorgeous. Immediately after that, he looks into a distorting mirror, which is mildly funny, I suppose. And then, as he comes round, he trips over the foot of the black man, the only black man in the scene, whose foot is stretched out. Now, the black man's a shoeshine man. Sometimes at that time, shine was the shorthand expression for black man, and a slightly negative, well, a negative expression for a black man as well. And then he comes back to the man and starts to sing a song. It's a song from a 1933 film. When there's a shine on your shoes, there's a melody in your heart. When there's a shine on your shoes, there's a melody in your heart. And this man cheers up, starts to shine his shoes. And they do a kind of dance while he's sitting there. It's not really a proper shoe shine, it's a dance like shoe shine, like this. And then at this point, the rhythm has changed, the speed has quickened up, and he goes into a kind of frenzied dance. Shine on your shoes, shoe shine, shoe shine. He says shine over 70 times in the course of this dance. He frightens the woman, the big woman who'd pushed him out the way earlier on, and the black man's kind of encouraging him. And finally he goes back to the box with the question mark, hits it with his backside. The box opens and there's a Yankee marching song, Yankee North Americans, the Americans from the northern states. When you saw the train earlier on, did anybody notice the name of the train? It does say Santa Fe on it. I think that's probably where it's going. Did anybody else? Right, it's also got the name of a person, General Grant. General Grant was the general who led the Yankee forces, the northern forces, against the southern forces in the successful fight in the war against slavery. Of course, the war wasn't just about that, but obviously that's a major facet of it. General Grant became president shortly afterwards. And then in this frenzied state, the man joins him in what Cavell sees as a temporary equality. For a time they can dance as equals in enjoying this kind of frenzy of activity. There they are shaking hands, as it were. But of course this can't last, because Fred Astaire will go back to America as usual. He'll go back to the rest of the story and to his life. And so there's the walk-off. You know what they do in the walk-off? They do this as the main star walks off. That's what the black man's doing. And so he's going out of the arcade and on to his next engagement, whatever it is. And do you see the little sign at the top, the proud land, which rather suggests that the world he's going to loses the vitality that's here and goes back to the vanity, the false values of America as usual. Right, that's the end of the slide sequence. I've got loads more I could show you that's written, but I'm not going to do that. Does anybody want to respond to all that?
Did Cavell say anything about chance? It doesn't really, I don't want to take the discussion in a different way. Give me a short answer, but there seemed to be a sequence that the destiny, you skipped over with your slides, the fortune teller, he didn't like his first fortune, and then the next game was a game of chance that he kind of jigged a little bit.
Yes.
And so I didn't know if that was in Cavell or
whether... I can't remember, quite honestly, but he does certainly mention the fortune teller and the kind of mix of humour and the relation to fate and fortune and destiny. So what is the destiny of America? And this would fit in with his general engagement with Emerson's text, for example, where the idea of America is a perfectionist ideal. So Emerson says in the 19th century, and it's still true, America has not been discovered. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that America is not just a landmass. America is a vision of a just, democratic society. Do we have it? Donald Trump thinks we do, or could do, but no, I mean, we don't, because whoever the president is, there's bound to carry on being injustice. So America will be a project. It's something we're reaching for. And there's this sort of anxiety, concern about what America will become. It's not just about America, of course. You could apply this in different societies. But America's a very powerful example because it's the first modern democracy. And there's a kind of a stain on all of us, in a sense, or a compromise with all of us, because that first democracy doesn't include the votes for women and doesn't include black people in the vote. So the Constitution is corrupt. A lot of this is about Constitution. The Constitution of the society, of the polis, the city-state, which we talked about yesterday, and the Constitution of the human being. Because we are compromised by these complexities in our past. I think it's true if you're black too. It's not just a matter of speaking as a white person in England. It's not just that. It's far more complicated. There is always problems and bloodshed in the past. Do you want to say
I
something?
also picked up on that aspect, and I thought it might have something to do with, you told us to look out for like the false praise, and I was kind of thinking about like that was he was trying to get the answers he wanted, but that wasn't the truth. So
Yes.
he, with the destiny game, he threw out the destiny he didn't want and chose and was
Good.
satisfied with the second, and then I don't know, now that we've brought up the queer aspect of it, I wonder if like when he was being himself or whatever before the shoe shine, when he walked by the box with the question mark, it didn't work for him, but then after the shoe shine and he had the whatever is the song, the rhythm in your heart, or
Yeah, something like that. The melody in
Yeah.
your heart. Shine on your shoes, the melody in your heart.
It
But
was
then,
maybe he had the life energy he understood his true destiny maybe. So when he walked by it, then the box opened and it
yes, okay.
revealed what it was meant to reveal.
So the song has two stages. Partly it's a repeat of the 1932 version, which is kind of a happy song, and then it kind of goes mad in the middle. Shoe shine, shoe shine. He gets carried away with it, and the dance changes completely, and there's a sort of frenzy in his movements, and the black man joins in with him. But of course the initial song is prompted by falling over the black man. So the interruption that the black man's leg provides is what he needs to get going. But now Robert Gooding Williams will say, then this just repeats the pattern, because the white man is feeding off the energy of the black man. And even that it's sexualized, there's a sexual energy in the black man, as the stereotype suggests, and that gets passed on to Astaire somehow. Yes, Maria. Yes.
I'm wondering whether we could say that the Hunter, the white figure, is the reason, the rationality, and the shoe shine man is the emotions. And Hunter, because he's they are selling off his things, and his career seems to be at the end, is kind of depressed. So he's trying to convince himself not to be. I think that even though he seems happy, he's still depressed.
Yes, okay.
So he's temporarily trying to borrow the emotion of being happy from the shoe shine man. For me, he's still, like even his smile, you can see he's still depressed. But for me, that does some justice to the power of emotions. Like we were saying before, to what degree can we have pure rationality and reason, and be humans just operating on reason? So for me, if we read it in this way, we have justice done to the emotions in their power, that even temporarily they can make the rational man happy,
yes.
even for that 2 minutes.
Yes, that's very helpful, but you might like to take a slightly different pairing now. If you take Apollo and Dionysus, which you'd be familiar with, and I think many others are because Nietzsche writes about this contrast, then Apollo represents formal beauty, if you like, an order. So the top hat and tails, it's very formal, it's very precise and smart. Whereas Dionysus represents something more like raw energy. So when the dance happens, it's as though there's an energy coming from the black man as they go around. And I repeat to you, this looks very good from one point of view, but it could be just another reinstalling of this stereotype of the black man as full of energy, and hence the white man borrowing from that or stealing from that, appropriating that in some way. So what Cavell tries to say is that they achieve equality of a kind, that for a brief time in that dance they are together and they're in harmony together. It won't last because this is America, this is 1953, what do you expect? Of course it's an unjust society. So, and there's no question of the white man being absolved by this. He's not being forgiven for the past or something like that. He's not showing he's okay by doing this. But for that temporary period, they are at least together. So it's a vision of how the world could be different. What interests me by it, we're going to have to stop soon, perhaps we can talk a little bit informally later, but what interests me by it is that there's a complexity to this that you can go over and over and over, a bit like the Curcia story. It doesn't, to my mind, admit any unilinear reading, any one-tracked reading, because one possibility opens up and then another one comes in. I can illustrate this very clearly. If you take the naming of the train, the General Grant, now that looks like a good thing from one point of view, doesn't it? It's acknowledging someone who fought against slavery. So, he's a good guy, so let's celebrate him. But on the other hand, that kind of gesture could be a way in which a society makes itself feel good about the way things are, and therefore reduces the need to do something further. And there's no answer to this. These symbols, these ways we have of seeing the world, are ambivalent, and we live with that kind of ambivalence. Do you see what I mean? So the patterns you've just seen, I don't think have a unilinear reading, not a one-tracked reading. They're open to these different responses. And if you go through it, as I've tried to do, I think they set those responses in play. My worry about some writing about race is that it tends to be too sure of itself, too clear in where it stands. Whereas I think that race is inevitably a complex factor in human experience. I don't think there's any simple way of stepping out of this or being in neutral ground, because we are all caught up with histories, whether we like it or not. I'm not saying we can't deliberately support those who are from impoverished groups. We can do all sorts of things, but we can't step out of this complex past that inevitably marks us, just as we inevitably have a particular skin colour and a particular language, for example. Well, I hope you didn't think it was a waste of time looking at this. Okay? Can I just play the sequence once again, because I've talked about it, and then we'll call it a day? Is that all right? Just that short sequence. Okay, if you want to know more, I'll send you a paper I've written about it, which is coming out. It should be out now, I think. So that's us done. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you got something from it. Japanese people who are visiting from Kyoto will have a piece of written work to do. The rest of you won't.